Bakugou Katsuki, Shoto Todoroki, Ichiro Kirishima, and Denki Kaminari had been in a game of truth or dare for about a month now. It had started as a simple bet from the electric blonde to the cool hot guy Shoto, and devolved into a childish party game that the four boys took way too serious. Under the guise of the game, Kaminari had eaten rotten eggs as in plural. Kirishima had been hanging around in the dorm's common room in just his underwear, and Shoto even went so far as to change the ringtone on his phone to a rather crude rap song with way too many expletives. However, now it was Bakugou's turn, and Kaminari, who was still upset over the stunt with the eggs, gleefully came up with the most potentially humiliating dare. "I dare you to ask the weird girl out." Everyone in the friend group knew who he meant. It was you. You were born with a mutation quirk that gave you plant-like properties. From your knees down, your legs ended in long, heavy roots that you used to maneuver similar to a snake. And flower-like scent was always wafting around you. You were even able to root yourself into loose dirt and absorb nutrients from the ground. There were a few problems though. For one, your vocal cords were very primitive, only able to speak in grunts and shouts. In fact, loud screams were part of your abilities, as you reached just the right wavelength to disorient, confuse, and even deafen opponents. Another problem came at around elementary school. You were unable to show emotions. You still had them, of course, but most of the time all you did was stare at people with a deadpan expression. Almost robotic. Or, well, plant-like. What no one really understood was that you showed your emotions subtly. So subtly, and hidden not even you yourself knew. And Bakugou was about to find that out. It was the end of classes for today, and Aizawa had already left the classroom. You were usually the last to leave. Bakugou and your classmates assumed to avoid any conversation. He glanced over to you. You were staring out the window at a non-specific spot. What were you thinking? The blonde wondered. He had to admit himself, if it wasn't for your strange legs, he'd be attracted to you. He continued gazing at you, trying to push himself to actually get the right amount of courage. When you seemingly snapped back to reality and began packing your stuff, it was now or never. Pulling out his phone and starting an audio recording before putting it back in his pockets. He hoped desperately it would be able to capture everything. Then the boy got on his feet. After hearing him approach, you stopped packing and sat up straight, looking at him with a deadpan expression. He smiled awkwardly as he came closer. The faint smell of fruit entered his nostrils. He couldn't really pinpoint which one, but it was sweet and pleasant. "Hey," he started, scratching the back of his head. "Got a sec?" His inner voice was shouting at him to abort, but he silenced it by biting his lip. Of course he didn't react, continuing to simply stare at him. He was starting to get very nervous, as if he wasn't already. He quickly realized just how difficult this might be after all, and Bakugou now understood just how insidious the stare had been. And he wished he was anywhere but here. He tapped the tip of his right foot on the ground. And after a deep sigh, he simply decided to finish this. How about you come to my dorm room at 8 p.m. and we watch a movie on my laptop or something? At this point, any other girl would smugly grin, decline, or worse, make a dumb remark, and then decline. You, however, kept looking at him, occasionally blinking. With bated breath, he stood there. In other words, I'm asking you out. Awaiting any response or reaction from you, it was like talking to a Chinese doll. A creepy one at that. He suppressed a sigh. Yes or no? He was getting impatient. Finally, he gave up, before saying, "Alright, see you then." He left the classroom. As soon as the door closed behind him, he exhaled, the tension finally being released. Bakugou took out his phone and stopped the recording, then sent it to the others. Instantly, their group chat blew up. They had their laughs, made silly jokes, some of them rather crude. Denki was in utter disbelief, but there was one voice missing. Shoto's. The boy had his brows furrowed. Something seemed fishy here. And then he quickly typed, "What if she actually shows up?" The chat became dead silent. "Dude, are you for real?" That was Denki. "Bro, you're so fucked," said Kirishima. And then finally Shoto wrote, "Azawa himself recommended her, if you remember. You know, for the hero course. If you make this a bad experience for her and she complains to him, in whatever way she can, that's it. Bye-bye hero career." Bakugou's face turned white. Crap, he thought as he rushed towards the dorms. Ignoring his friends who are bawling their eyes out in laughter in the common room couch, and into his room. Panicking, he grabbed his dirty piles of clothes and stuffed them into his closet. His original thought was to simply say to you, "Hey, you didn't say anything, so I thought you wouldn't come," and then send you away, if you were to come, but Shoto was right. After his room was properly cleaned, he threw his laptop on the dorm's bed, going through the streaming sites he was subscribed to. But nothing seemed interesting. And then a thought came to him. The angry blonde left his room and stomped towards the dorm of his enemy, Izuku Midoriya. He hammered his fist against the door until the green-haired pipsqueak opened it. "Kachan!" he said in surprise. "Deku, I need you to tell me." Izuku blinked. "Yes?" "Let's assume some chick would want to date you. What movie would you watch with her?" The boy blinked sheepishly. Something she would like, even if I hated it. I mean, of course, there's the chance we both would enjoy the movie she'd like, and or I pick for her, and..." Bakugou rolled his eyes at Deku's continued rambling. A movie you liked and he hated. Why didn't he think of that? Not saying another word, he slammed Deku's door shut and returned to his room. Only to then realize that he still wasn't any step closer. At least the amount of potential movies to show had quadrupled. And then the clock turned 8. You had waited before Bakugou's room for 4 minutes, so the second your wristwatch said its time, you knocked on his door. He opened it slowly. He was dressed in a simple black shirt and comfy grey sweatpants. You, on the other hand, were only wearing a long tank top that reached down to your roots. You had a pillow under your right arm. A scent of roses hung around you. Bakugou sighed. Then he let you inside. Once he closed the door behind you, he spoke up. "I'll admit, I didn't think you'd show up. And then I would have cleaned this place for nothing. You looked at him. Your only reaction was tilting your head. But I'm glad you're here? Bakugou wasn't used to acting nice, and it hurt him mentally. You said in response. He blinked. You actually made a noise. He scratched the back of his head in confusion. What in the world could you mean? But then he saw you place down your pillow on his bed and sitting down on it. And then it became clear to him. It was a positive reaction. You pointed at his laptop. Fine, he growled. I also admit that I haven't come up with something to watch. He paused. Frankly, no one knows anything about you. You blinked and simply pressed the power button, without averting your gaze, and he gave up. Alright, make some room, he grumbled. Bakugou typed in his password before opening his browser. Then a genius idea came to him. Alright, why don't you choose the movie? You didn't react, but the flowery scent around you changed to something softer, more lavender-like. Gently you took his mouse, like it was a fragile artifact, before clicking on an anime streaming service in his bookmarks. Scrolling through the vast collection, Bakugou was afraid you'd make him binge-watch a really long show, but when he saw the cursor move over to the movie tab, he needed to suppress a sigh of relief. The movie you chose was a Japanese take on Alice in Wonderland. Pretty wholesome, actually. And so the night went on. By the 30-minute mark, Bakugou realized something. He was enjoying this. He side-glanced you as you intently stared at the screen with a deadpan expression. Maybe it was the lavender smell getting the better of him, but seeing your expressionless face staring at the happenings on screen contrasted so well, it almost felt like a joke. Most importantly, however, I started to like you. As cliché as it sounded, you really weren't like other girls. His body was telling him to wrap an arm around you, just to be closer. But then, with a very subtle bump, your head was suddenly resting on his shoulder. His left eye twitched as his neurons fired. In this position, he had a clear view of your cleavage. Your expression was still the same, but the lavender smell was getting stronger. Bakugou began to feel dizzy, but in a good way, and warm. Slowly he exhaled through his mouth. Do you like the movie? He said quietly, just to beat the silence between the two of you. For a moment the scent around you became more citrusy. He blinked, finally noticing what was happening. Wait. He paused the movie and you looked at him. Just an experiment. He sighed. This was really stupid, and could backfire really horribly. Are you a boy? Bakugou closed his eyes and took in the scent. Was this bananas? Still with his eyes closed, he asked, Are you a girl? The smell of limes entered his nostrils. Citrus, he muttered. He had cracked the code. Opening his eyes, he immediately blushed. You were mere inches away from his face, your unblinking eyes staring directly into his. What are you? The lavender smell returned, and he realized what it meant. Without saying another word, he closed the distance to your lips. You closed your eyes. He was so soft, and like anything you had imagined. He wrapped his arms around your torso, pulling you closer to him. And then you let yourself fall on your back, almost hitting your head on the bed's headboard. He groaned into you as your roots began to wrap around him, tying him up like a helpless anime girl. He separated from her mouth with a smug grin, a thin line of spit connecting your mouths. I'll be honest, I didn't think you'd be such a pervert. The scent around you turned spicy. His grin widened into a full-on smile. Was this anger? One of your tendrils wrapped around his throat, pulling ever so slightly. He gasped for air. Tighter! He pressed through his clenched teeth. You blinked. Slowly you began to cut off his air supply as his hands crashed down onto your chest. Bakugou's body screamed for air. Your face turned red just as he was about to pass out. You softened your grip on him, letting him fall on top of you as he began to desperately heave. He never felt like this before. I didn't know you were. Oh God. I didn't know you were such a choking hazard. He huffed before pressing his lips back onto yours. Unbeknownst to both of you and him, your body had been secreting aphrodisiacs the entire evening. And now both of your bodies screamed for a desperate release. A release neither of you could resist any longer.